All right, guys, welcome to another Q&A session. And if this is your first, welcome. Excited to have you guys. And if you're coming back, welcome back. I feel like these have been a lot of fun and always been pretty different each session. So I'm really excited to have you guys back. Today, we're going to have a special guest with Daphne Cheung. She's a data scientist and a recent data scientist at the Disney company. And the reason I'm so excited and I wanted kind of as many people to attend this as possible because it's a really different perspective. Daphne comes from a non-technical background where she really had to kind of hustle and like put in that extra blood, sweat, and tears to get into a prestigious role at a prestigious company like Disney. And what's great about this talk is she's only been there a year. She recently went through the whole process to get that first role. So her tips are going to be so relevant, so useful for all of you guys who are looking to break into data science currently. Like I said, this is going to be really invaluable, and I'm super excited to have Daphne with us today. With that, I'll hand it off to her, and she'll kick off her kind of career journey and her presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for the intro. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if and when you can see it.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep. Looks good.
Yay. Okay. Sounds good. Hi, everyone. My name's Daphne, and I am a data scientist at the Walt Disney Company. As you can see, there's plenty of Disney IP throughout this presentation. Just to kick things off, I'll give you an overview of what I'll be talking about in my short presentation. I promise I'll leave plenty of time for questions, but to start off, I'll give you an intro into some background on my journey into data science and my education and some of my work experience prior to working at Disney. And then kind of walk through a day in my life, just because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions about what a data scientist actually does. I think it's one thing to say you want to go into data science. It's another thing to realize what a data scientist actually does on a day-to-day basis. I will also preface that by saying that each data scientist has sort of a different way that they go about their day as well. So in no way is this, an indication of what it's like to be a data scientist in other places. And then last but not least, a couple of key career takeaways that I have found so far to be helpful based on the year and a half or so that I've been with Disney. So more about me. You'll see a couple of photos on the right-hand side. Those are photos of my experiences at Disney so far. I actually went to school at Babson College, which is a business school on the East Coast. So the school itself only had one major. It was a very small school. I went to school with 2,000 other kids, and I graduated in 2019. So fairly recent. From there, some of my internship experiences, some of my projects would include the Walt Disney Company, of course. I did an internship in business intelligence at Boeing. I've also done some consulting for Baskin-Robbins and Dunkin' Brands, worked in a couple of different Data for Good initiatives in the last few years, and have also had some experience in startup and technology overseas. So I spent a little bit of time in Singapore and Hong Kong and worked in the startup and entrepreneurship sphere there, so to speak. So really my interests lie in that intersection between tech, data, and business and building community. So right off the bat, you can see that my experience so far is not super technical. And I have this business background. And I think that by nature, my interests and my skills and my abilities lie more on that business side of things. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that's contributed to my career so far, but that's really where my skills lean towards. I don't know if some of you guys might be able to relate, but yeah, I certainly didn't come from a technical background, and I don't think by nature I am someone who is incredibly technical to begin with. So from there, I would really like to be able to incorporate that back into my career, working more on the business facing side of things, and then incorporating that analytical ability as well. So I certainly have that passion for data and see the value of data in business. Wherever I can find that intersection, that's where I want to operate. Now I kind of want to go into my journey. That's a cute picture of Simba that I always like to include in my presentations, but that was me when I first started my journey in the spring of my junior year. So we're taking it all the way back to college, which was really only 2 years ago for me. But that was really the first time that I had any exposure to analytics. I knew what it was, I knew what data was, but I hadn't yet been exposed to it and didn't really even know what the job prospects were at the time. I took my first business analytics course, and that's where I started my self-learning journey and started that interest in data. But really the bad part of that was I became so interested that I wanted to learn more, but realized that I went to a business school and that really the offerings in terms of technical capabilities were not really there yet. Data science, although not entirely new at the time, was still fairly new to the point where there weren't that many master's programs yet. Now there's like a ton of them. There's a ton of boot camps and everything. There weren't that many, there weren't very many schools even who offered data science as majors, whereas now you're seeing that a lot more. And I'm seeing a lot of high school and college students have that opportunity to pursue that track in college. And I didn't have that opportunity. So really, I spent a lot of my time taking what I learned from that one analytics course and building off of that and thinking, great, where else can I apply this knowledge and this great stuff that I was learning? Once I realized that I was interested in analytics, I decided to start applying for analytics roles. And I really wasn't sure where this was going to take me because I felt so underqualified. I felt like I was competing against these kids who did have technical degrees or were working towards technical degrees. So I'm sure there were a ton of CS kids even who were applying to the same roles that I was applying to. So right off the bat, I didn't feel like a competitive candidate going into the job search. And this was the internship just before my senior year, which typically, if some of you guys are in school or in high school even, this internship is supposed to define your career almost. At least that's what it felt like at the time. It certainly doesn't. It really doesn't. But I got my first internship with Boeing in business intelligence and I loved it, but I didn't love the company itself. It wasn't for me, but I knew that had solidified my interest in analytics at the very least. I did a lot of visualization work. I analyzed a lot of the data that had been previously untouched by the team that I was working on. And it was really cool. I really enjoyed working in a data capacity. But I knew from there that I actually wanted to go into something more technical. I really wanted to program more. And so I really spent most of that summer and fall of my senior year taking more analytics courses, even doing copious amounts of self-learning. So everything from reading textbooks, reading O'Reilly books, which I still have on my desk now, to taking like Coursera classes, because really that was all that I had access to. And I still felt like I was at a disadvantage because of that. Because again, I was realizing that I was applying to the same jobs that someone like an engineer or a computer science student was applying to. They probably had a head start in terms of programming, they had a head start in computational thinking. And so I faced a lot of imposter syndrome. And honestly, I wasn't even applying to data science jobs at the time. I was applying to data analyst jobs, any sort of entry-level analytics jobs. And I didn't even think data science was in my realm of like capability or the realm of possibilities. And then lo and behold, I did this thing where Grace Hopper came up, and this was an opportunity for women in computer science in their junior and senior years. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Grace Hopper, it is essentially this huge like recruitment conference where young women in college will put in their resumes, and the different companies that are sponsoring this conference will go and handpick these resumes and say, hey, can you come in and interview at the conference for this job? So I looked at the conference and I was like, it's not going to kill me. No one's going to sue me if I try and put my resume in, even though I'm not a computer science major and I have never taken a computer science course. I doubt they'll care. So I put in my resume. I took that leap of faith on myself, and I was like, this is not going to go anywhere because it is a conference that is attended by thousands and thousands of women who are in the right field, so to speak, compared to myself at least. But of course, a week goes by and I start getting emails about interviews from the companies that were going to be attending and were interested in interviewing me for potential roles. I had told all of them I actually was not able to go to the conference physically because I had midterms during the conference. And I really could not afford to miss midterms or fly myself out to Florida to go to this conference as a senior in college. I didn't have the money to do that. But the only company that had offered me an interview that was still interested in interviewing me, despite the fact that I could not be there, was Disney. So by some stroke of luck, I got an interview with Disney, even though they had plenty of people to choose from in person. Did the interviews, went through something like 4 or 5 rounds of interviews. So it was pretty extensive, and somehow ended up getting the job. Um, so that's kind of how I ended up at Disney. I definitely think that it comes with some level of luck and chance, and having that opportunity to come across someone who might have thought, hey, she looks like a decent human being and could maybe be a good fit. But I also think that it was just being in the right place at the right time. Disney happened to have been looking for someone who was less experienced. They were looking for someone who was coming in with a different perspective and someone who had somewhat of an entrepreneurial and business mindset. And I feel like you may be finding that more and more if some of you guys are starting to go into the job search in the data science field, is that more and more companies are now looking for people who have those soft skills as well as those technical skills. So in getting that job, it kind of solidified this mentality of, well, I am capable of getting a data science job. I am capable of working in data, even though I don't have a background or any sort of formal education on data. That doesn't mean that the imposter syndrome disappeared. Just to speak on that a little bit, it certainly follows you around, and it's up to you to tackle that imposter syndrome, because that's really something that most of us create in our own heads. It doesn't actually exist. A lot of the fears and the anxiety that stem from imposter syndrome come from within, and your own belief in yourself. So I still feel that a lot. For those of you guys who are feeling that now or can relate in some way, like I said, it's something that follows you so long as you don't tackle it. So that's kind of a piece of advice here based on my journey so far, is that if you're coming from a place that's non-traditional and you feel like things are really difficult and you don't measure up to the people around you, just know that you are where you are for a reason. And that you should take that seat at the table and take advantage of it, because the universe would not have given you that sign if you did not belong there. So that's kind of the mentality that I've taken with me into my job.
Let's take a step back. I want to just highlight 2 things that I loved about kind of your description of your journey. You go back 1 slide.
Yeah, sure. Oh no.
Did I screw you up?
Now we have to bring all the animations back. You're good.
I just think, like, when you mentioned the interview, right? Like, you knew that the chances were technically slim, right, to get this interview, whatnot. You're on the other side of the country, but you still went for it, and it worked out in your favor. And I think that's something that people don't do enough. I think they just like discredit like any chance because it's too far fetched, right? But that I love this about your slide, because you just said, why not, right? And I think the more people say that, the more opportunities will come people's ways, which is great, right? I think that like it's such a great lesson for those that immediately get discouraged and just don't even go for it, right? I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I just want to highlight that because like I think people won't acknowledge that point, but that's huge, right? That's a huge part of your character that definitely paid dividends.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That's absolutely a point that others have also pointed out in my journey, is that I didn't even realize this myself, but I am someone who takes chances on myself, on other people, on different opportunities. Not only was it a huge risk putting my resume in, going through the interview process, knowing very well that I, maybe didn't have a chance at this job, but also knowing that this job was going to be difficult. That too was something that I had a lot of questions about. I almost didn't take this job because I was intimidated by it. I was intimidated by the work that was presented before me. I was intimidated by everything they were giving me, even the compensation packages. I was just like, I don't deserve any of this. And that nearly held me back. So if you're looking at a job, for instance, and it's asking for 2 to 3 years of experience, apply to it anyway. If you're, faced with a job that may be a little bit intimidating, take it anyway if you're really passionate about it, because you have to take chances on yourself to really know that something is the right way to go. Sometimes you don't know until you try. And that's taken me very far, I think. That's a really big learning lesson for me.
That's awesome.
Cool. couple of skills that I use on my day-to-day and key concepts. I feel like this is always interesting because I get this question a lot of from people who are trying to get into data science or are just now learning data science. What exactly is it that you really do? And it's some mix of all of these things. And I know this is already very broad and very general, but no day looks the same. I'll go into my day in a little bit, but key skills, data management and engineering. I feel like this is not 100% relevant to every single data science role, but in many ways, I was thrown into this chaos where they didn't have data engineers or analysts or machine learning engineers or anyone. So I almost had to wear all these different hats of being someone who built a database, an analytics platform, someone who also managed and oversaw the data engineering side of things too. How are we ingesting data into the platforms we're using? That's all stuff that I never anticipated needing to know going into my job, but it just so happened I was placed in an environment where I did need to learn those things. Databases, not so much. I realize I haven't had to use it as much as I thought I would now in the last couple of months. But the bulk of the work that I do is in analytics visualization and using Python. I don't use SQL as much, but I know in some other environments, it may be more important to use SQL. Tableau I use quite a bit. We are a very Tableau heavy organization where I sit. And then tools, make sure you learn JIRA. That's something I was not familiar with. They don't teach you JIRA in school. And working with program managers, et cetera. So those are just some high-level overview of the skills that I've had to use. Key concepts that I've had to apply, primarily sitting in statistical and predictive modeling, which essentially fall under machine learning anyway. Prescriptive analytics, as well as business intelligence. Those two, I think, take up the bulk of my time, just because I think what they say is true. As someone who's an entry-level data scientist, you spend a lot more of your time working on sort of business intelligence and data analytics problems as opposed to heavy machine learning problems. I built a lot of smaller models that maybe brought out insights that my leaders would be interested in, but less so, for instance, building out an entire recommendation engine. That's not something that I'm really expected to do anytime soon. But I'm also expected to kind of think big picture, and this may just be the nature of where I sit again, but because I'm the only data scientist where I sit, no one else around me knows data science or knows data in general. No one else knows how we can even move towards using AI, how we can even move towards using things like RPA and automating some of the healing in the work that I do. So I almost have to do that. I have that responsibility of doing that research and then kind of building out that roadmap and seeing how we can get there. No promises to my team that I can achieve all of that. But for now, I'm at least capable of saying, hey, this is the roadmap to get to AI. This is the roadmap to get to where you guys want to be as automated as possible. And this is where I see our future. So that's kind of a part of my responsibility as a data scientist, is being able to say, this is what we can achieve in X amount of time. And then a lot of storytelling. So to go back to that point of, I don't work in an organization full of data scientists. I don't work with other data analysts. I'm in a very different position. One where a lot of the time, the people around me don't understand the work that I do, or even the value of the work that I do. They'll tell me to do something. I'll build out some kind of model. I'll predict something, forecast something for them. And then they'll go, what is this? Like, what are you trying to tell me? And then I'm like, well, you gave me directions to do this, so I don't understand. It was a little bit confusing at first when I first started my job, because I forgot or just didn't realize that the executives I was working with, they're incredibly smart people, but they're not data people. So honestly, I spend so much time working on documentation, presentations, demos even, where I'm explaining something that I did. I'm talking through the business value, I'm talking through the results, I'm talking through implementation, because, and I talk about this a lot in my other speaking things, but you can give someone the most complex and beautiful deep learning algorithm. And if that person doesn't understand what you did, they won't know what to do with it. And it'll be virtually useless to them. So a lot of the time I'll be sitting in a room sometimes with other people who are in data, and they'll build something really cool for my team. And our leaders are just like, okay, great, what now? And you're kind of expected as a data scientist to be able to communicate that as well and relay that information to your team and your leadership. So a lot of storytelling in play in the data science sphere. And I think that is often underplayed and kind of underrated. I think it's more important than you think, and should be one of the like top 10 skills as a data scientist.
Yeah, I'm sure there's gonna be questions on that, but I always want to echo that, because you're not going to be like in a research role. Like 90% of data science roles are within like huge Fortune 500 companies where they're in a position just like you, where you're going to be interacting with people who aren't technical, who think data science is a verb that you do, right? Like they just don't really get it. And what ends up happening is you have this really interesting idea, and then unless you could get people excited about it, convey what it's doing, convey how they could use the model, well, you're going to hit roadblocks over and over again, and that can be very discouraging.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many technical things you see on the slide, but that storytelling piece, if you could excel there, it'll make your life so much easier across the board. And I think everyone, if you could take away one kind of piece of kind of advice, that is it, because I think Daphne is a great kind of example of how like key storytelling overcomes maybe not having a PhD or master's, etc. Right? That has played to our advantage more so than someone who's just truly technical. And that's just a great example to learn from.
Yeah, and a good example is even just a couple of months ago, I am working with someone else who isn't a data scientist, but has a lot of experience, oddly enough, in data science. And it's really funny because we'll be in the same room, and oftentimes he'll do something way cooler than me. He's got like 15 years on me, right? And I build this super simple thing, this super simple clustering algorithm, and he shows his stuff, and everyone's just like, okay, now what? Like, what does any of this mean? Right. And so it's a good example of, you can be in the same room as some very talented, very smart people with PhDs, with masters, whatever it may be. And if that person cannot relay the value of their work or the value of them as a human being to the team, it doesn't mean anything. Because oftentimes projects and cool ideas take investment, whether emotional or monetary investment. And no leadership is going to invest in something they don't understand. And that's just reality.
Exactly. That's awesome.
Yeah, so a day in my life. I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on what exactly it is I work on really quickly. There's no easy way to explain it. I don't work in the cool, sexy side of Disney, unfortunately. But the reality is I work in enterprise network infrastructure. So really I'm designing models and solutions and using data that we produce as an enterprise IT organization to make our IT better, whether in the form of predictive or whatever it may be. It could even be even just like something as simple, like I said, as clustering something. That's something entirely new to them. Network infrastructure is really just the organization that manages and designs the networks that our company operates on. So everything from our attractions operate on a network, the buildings that we work in have to operate on a network. We have to log into a VPN every day. Now that we work from home, that's something that I work on. As well as the networks that enable our television and our studios to run, right? They have to send files back and forth on the network so that people can direct, edit, and film movies. So very much widespread across the organization. I work on every segment within the company, but very much on the back end. I don't work in a business facing or customer facing capacity, really just using analytics and data to enhance the network. So a day in my life as a data scientist at the Walt Disney Company. These are just a few ideas of what I'll work on a day-to-day basis, or some of the activities I have to participate in. The first being meeting with and understanding stakeholder needs. So I work in an organization, like I've said several times, that doesn't have any other data scientists. And oftentimes I have to go around, talk to a ton of network engineers and say, okay, well, what is it that, what problems are you having? What are some of your pain points? Can you talk me through your process? And how do you think data can solve that? I'll even ask things like, okay, well, do you have any data? Where does it sit? Have you ever looked at your data? Things like that. And oftentimes that takes up a lot of my time because I don't come from a network place, and on vice versa, network people don't know much about data. So it's sometimes there's miscommunication, and we have to get to a place where we understand what the problem is that we need to solve. From there, I'll typically design and pitch some kind of data solution for a complex business problem. I don't know how many examples I can give you. There's probably some kind of NDA I signed at some point that I can't talk about. But yeah, typically I'll take whatever stakeholder needs and pain points I've gathered and design some kind of a data solution and see how that fits into our data strategy. We don't have much of a data strategy where I sit. I am also the person who designs that. So oftentimes I will be going back to the drawing board, looking at our trajectory as an organization. Where are we trying to grow? And how does that specific pain point, where does that pain point sit in our trajectory, in our strategy? Is that something worth solving? Are there other higher priority problems I should be working on? And then from there, I'll decide if that's something I want to pursue. Then I'll start gathering, cleaning, and visualizing data. That's a lot of the time. That's, like any other statistic or, blog will tell you, it's 80% of my time. Developing models for predictive capabilities. That's typically where our use cases sit, mostly in predictive. And then there's a decent amount of time that I also spend communicating analysis and results to executive leaders. It's funny because every time I do something or build something, they get really impressed because, like I said, they're not in data, and they'll literally just make me demo it for like 2 months to different people. And getting on like an executive's calendar is really difficult at Disney because they're very busy people. So I'll literally just spend months like talking to different people about the problem I've just solved, pitching it to them, telling them why I'm about to solve their problems and how they can use it. So that also takes up a decent amount of time. Obviously, it takes a while to get there after you've gathered, cleaned, and visualized your data, developed your models. But at the very end, I will admit, communicating your analysis and results does take up a lot of time. Cool. So some key career takeaways. Don't confine your education to the four walls of a classroom. I did see in your descriptions, in your bios for some of you guys that you are in school or you're in some kind of a program, a boot camp. One thing that I've learned is that I absolutely did not learn everything in the four walls of a classroom. Really take it upon yourself to take whatever it is you're learning and apply it to things that you are maybe interested in going into. So for instance, it'd be really cool if you were interested in going into a data science role at Facebook. Well, maybe you should build out some kind of a problem and work on a personal project for your portfolio outside of your classroom on a Facebook product, for instance. That is an example of showing initiative, one, and two, it's also showing your ability to, I guess, work with that specific company that you're interested in. So you show some familiarity with their business problems. And three, it's just a good way for you to practice applications of the knowledge you just learned in a way that's actually practical in real life. I've found that that has been very helpful for me, but it's also given me the opportunity to apply my skills in areas that I'm really interested in, but maybe don't necessarily get to address in my day-to-day job. So that leads me to my second point, is to let your curiosity guide you. I think when I first went into data science, when I first went into analytics, it was all just really overwhelming. I felt like I needed to learn everything. And to a certain degree, when you first start out in data science, yeah, I think it's important to familiarize yourself with the really important big picture ideas, but it's also so important for you to let your curiosity guide you and for you to pursue the opportunities that really do interest you. So that may come in the form of a portfolio of your personal projects. Maybe you decide that there's a specific niche area in data science you want to pursue. That's something you want to explore outside of the classroom as well. And I found that that's taken me very far because I have learned so much about things like bias in data and intersectionality in data and just so many other subjects that I don't typically get to learn about, at Disney in my day job. And that to me has kind of fueled my passion for data science. So that keeps the fire going. Sometimes not so much the stuff you're learning or working on in your day job or in school. And then to balance soft and technical skills, I think I'm a pretty good example of that in that I don't come from a technical place. So I've actually found that my soft skills have really defined my career and defined my ability to pursue opportunities and find opportunities. I think every time I've left an interview or I've spoken with someone who I've met for the first time and is just now learning about me, they've made comments about how my emotional intelligence, but also business acumen has contributed to my ability to solve a problem. and communicate my ideas well. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, that yes, it's really important to be technical, but also balance out your soft skills and practice those skills. But also know where your strengths are. I think one thing that really got to me in the beginning of my career, and even now, I finally kind of come to terms with this, is that I saw a lot of people in the field have or get PhDs, do their master's programs, whatever it may be. And I felt intimidated by that. I felt almost like, oh, I have to go and get a PhD now because everyone else has a PhD. And that's the only way I'm going to get a good data science role. And that was just, I mean, that put so much pressure on me to do something I wasn't even interested in. So really sit yourself down, reflect on what it is you want from your data science career, and take your next step based on that, because it puts so much unnecessary pressure on me. I finally came to the realization during COVID, actually, and was like, you know what? I don't want to get a PhD. I don't want to be the best data scientist in the world. I don't even know if I want to do data science forever. And that's okay. Like, that's me. And I know that my strengths lie more on the business side and the business facing side. I know that my strengths lie in working with other people and collaborating with others and solving people problems, which I'm not doing right now. And that's okay. So I realize where my strengths are. I know where I want to move next. And that's how I want to go about my career, as opposed to stressing about something I don't even want or care about. So yeah, reflection, sitting down and thinking about what it is you want is very important as well. That should have been added to this slide. And that's it for me. We can move into Q&A. You're on mute.
Always, without fail, every Zoom meeting that'll happen. I think that was amazing, right? That's exactly what I was expecting to come out of this, because you just provided so much insight into things that no one ever talks about ever. I don't know why it's taboo. People can't talk
I try
about
to be
things. Yeah, people just are scared to talk about the word soft skills or the phrase soft skills. I feel like that just no one ever wants to talk about it, but I think you addressed that so well. Before we do hop into the Q&A, I want to just post some really useful links in the chat for you guys all to check out, and obviously plug some information as well. The blog that I put together, I think Daphne mentioned inferiority complex, right, and imposter syndrome. I kind of wrote about my experience, because what's interesting about that is master's, not master's, PhD, not PhD, it doesn't matter where you came from. I think the imposter syndrome is always going to be there. I dealt with it during my first job. So take a look at my kind of experience there as well. Both mine and Daphne's LinkedIn is there. If you haven't connected with me yet, please do. I think we both try to make ourselves as accessible to people who are looking for advice, etc. So don't be a stranger. Definitely kind of reach out there. One thing that I kind of ask for some help and kind of plug is my new YouTube channel. I think what I've noticed is these sessions have been so much fun, and I love communicating with you guys in this very informal way. So what I'm thinking is this YouTube channel is going to be a proxy for that, where very conversational discussions and videos about topics like data storytelling, building models, interviewing, etc., just for you guys to use in your own time. Like I said, I don't ask for much, but if you can go check that out, please subscribe. I really appreciate you guys to kind of provide that support as I'm just getting it off the ground. And then lastly, we have the LinkedIn group that is consistently growing, that ultimately I want to use as an environment for you all to meet other people that are in a similar situation, that can either build projects together, kind of meet other people, just network, etc. Right? Definitely check all that out. There's a lot of resources there, but yeah, definitely check it out. Let me know what you think, and I hope it ends up being helpful. So now that I've got my shameless plug out of the way, let's
influencer.
Hey, I can ask for a little bit, right? I feel like I'm giving.
Yeah,
I can ask for a little bit,
yes,
right? Yeah. Such an influencer. Smash that like button.
Oh my God, like and subscribe.
Yeah, right.
Oh God.
Okay. Let's get to the fun part. Let's hop into the Q&A. And Daphne's kind of, I want her to be driving most of these questions, but obviously I'll add shed light on my experiences if they're relevant for that question, but she's the star of the show. So let's get this going. So the first question is, can we apply for intern positions when we're overseas and looking for jobs in the US?
Apply for intern positions, Disney specifically or in general?
I'm going to say in general because he or she didn't mention Disney,
Okay,
but
yeah.
you can give your insight on Disney.
Yeah, I don't know about Disney specifically, but thankfully I did go to school with a good amount of international students. So I have a little bit of insight. You can certainly apply. I must say things are difficult right now, I will admit, based on the landscape and the current COVID situation. But do apply, and you do have to click at a certain point that you require either sponsorship or some kind of visa, from my understanding. And typically a company will decide from there whether or not they want to sponsor you. So it is difficult, but it's worth a shot, and no one is going to stop you from applying. You can certainly apply. There's literally nothing stopping you from applying. Again, goes back to take your chances. But you know, I must say it's been difficult for most of my international friends right now.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add there is if you want to work for a specific tech company, it doesn't have to be in the US. Facebook has, say, Facebook,
Right.
Google, et cetera. All the big companies have offices everywhere, and they are doing a lot of fully remote internships. So you can definitely apply to those outside of the US. And again, it's going to be tough, but it's a better shot than maybe a US position. Okay, let me answer this. Hey, Sachin, can you do me a favor? That's a phenomenal question. Can you just add it to the Q&A and we'll definitely get to it. Thanks for asking. Just Sachin, please put that into the Q&A section so that we can get to it. Let's see, next question. Hi, how much does a graduate degree matter to enter into data science? I'm taking the industrial engineering degree with ops research courses. Do I need to take courses from data science to get that first job?
Yeah, I would say that it's not 100% necessary to have a graduate degree. Clearly, I managed to get a job somehow. But I will say that it helps. I actually think ops research has been a really good segue into data science. A lot of my friends who have broken into data science from outside of data science degrees have come from ops research, because the mathematical and the computational thinking is there. But I will say that, yeah, it's not 100% necessary. I've seen plenty of people go in without a graduate degree and do just fine. I would say that now, especially because there's so many resources out there beyond a graduate degree, that it's so much easier to learn whatever it is you need to know. I would say it has more to do with your drive and your curiosity and your ambition than it does to do with, you know, how many diplomas you have.
Yeah, and to echo Daphne's earlier point when she's presenting, showcase that curiosity through a portfolio, right? I think you don't need the master's, but showcase that you have the skill of a master's by kind of building a bunch of projects, right? Definitely showcase that.
And most places now, from my understanding, will ask for things like links to your GitHub or links to your portfolio or a personal website or something. Like, that's a lot more common now than it was before. I remember when I first started applying, that they never really had a space for that. And now it's like, list your LinkedIn, list your GitHub, list your personal website or portfolio, whatever it may be. And I can only imagine that would only help if you were, you know, to put a link there.
Totally. And I think one thing that I think has been really useful for you and I, right, is leveraging LinkedIn as a networking resource. I think just if you work on a project, showcase it and put it on LinkedIn, right? Hustle on LinkedIn, because when you build that network, you realize the opportunities are coming in at a steady pace, right? So use LinkedIn into your kind of advantage to kind of get whatever job you're looking for. Next question. What kind of projects do recruiters look for when considering, when many projects are done pretty common? Do they have to be unique so that they get highlighted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. 2 points there, two-part answer, I suppose. But the first being, you're right, so many projects are overly done. Also, I think that also has to do with the amount of like data that's available to people, but thanks to Kaggle. But I will say that, you know, two points that I would like to make is, I think recruiters are not necessarily looking for a great idea. I think they're looking for someone who has a great process or someone who is able to talk through their process. I also think that recruiters are looking for people who have done a project on something they have a passion for or interest in which case, when you talk about something you're interested in, you're automatically sounding more interesting and you're automatically more passionate when you're speaking. And that shows when you do an interview. Going back to that first point of knowing how to describe your process and have a process, I think the point of a portfolio project is not necessarily to do something like super cool and outlandish and crazy or super audacious or anything, but I think the point of it is to show that you have the ability to think and do good work and also talk about it. I've realized that has helped me a lot, in that most of the time when I've gone into even a case interview, I think that can also be a good example, is recruiters and your interviewers are more interested in hearing about your thought process than they are about your results. So for instance, you could build something really simple. You can do something really, really simple on your portfolio, or you could have a really simple solution in your case interview. And they would maybe still hire you because you did a good job of explaining it. You had a good thought process, or maybe even your thought process differed from everyone else's. That can also be a unique defining factor for you.
Yeah, totally. It's an opportunity to highlight how you would think if they were to bring you on board, right?
Right. Yeah.
If you've shown that you did your data analysis, your feature engineering properly, your model tuning properly, even if it's like, I think it's a Titanic example on Kaggle that's like the most generic.
Yes.
But if you showcase you've done each of those sections really well, it doesn't matter if it's a project that everyone does. You've showed that, oh, if we bring him into work on this project, he would do it with sound logic, right? That's great advice.
And if you're going to talk about it like everyone else just did it, then obviously they're not going to enjoy that, right? Talk about it like with excitement, with passion, with interest. Talk about it with that same interest you had when you were working on it, and that'll show. That you put in the effort and the energy. I think that's more important and more impressive than anything else.
And like to your earlier point, I think my first project was around Messi and around soccer. And I think that really helped because I was like so excited working on it, right? And that definitely showed. I was like giddy talking about my terrible results because it was like the first project I've ever worked on. That definitely helps.
Yeah.
This is from Micah. How much mathematical theory and processes do you utilize on the average day?
As a first-year data scientist, close to none. It's definitely closer to, I definitely use a lot more statistics than I do, for instance, like linear algebra. And that's a common misconception that I think a lot of people have. I felt that same pressure when I first went into data science, like, okay, I need to brush up on my calculus and my linear algebra because I'm going to use that every day. That was like the biggest lie I'd ever told myself. So brush up on your statistical modeling. I think that's more important. But as someone who's in their first year, I think I spend a lot more time doing basic statistical modeling than I do using something like calculus or linear algebra, which are the two most common in data science, I'm assuming, I think. Yeah.
Totally. It's more about understanding the assumptions that go into a model. Like, should I use this model versus another model?
Right.
That's not real hardcore math, but that's the extent of what you need to know. And I mean, I've been in data science for like 4 or 5 years now. I don't think I can do linear algebra anymore, and I'm not ashamed to say it. Like, I just don't think I'd ever need to, really. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
I like forced myself to read an entire linear algebra textbook and realized I was never going to use any of it. So don't waste your time.
Yeah, unless you're in research, but like.
Also, I think that's definitely more applicable in a more like technical heavy position. So for instance, being a research scientist, being in a more of like a machine learning engineering capacity, less so as someone who's maybe in their first year in data science. That's definitely not something you will be using.
There's some follow-up questions that I think are really interesting to elaborate on this discussion. So apply probability, regression, time series analysis. I'll give my perspective. So a lot of these packages kind of let you do a great job, especially in Fortune 500 companies, right? You're not building a research model, right? You're not trying to publish a paper. You're trying to build something that can be used at scale. So typically what you're going to use is an out of the box model, whether that's a Keras deep learning model or something like sklearn. And what's important to know is not the core underlying math. Like you're not going to tune the math of that sklearn package. You're going to optimize the hyperparameters, right? And that's kind of the level of detail you need to be familiar. So you really need to know what certain hyperparameters do to a model. And it might get to the same point about neural networks, right? Like if you're using Keras or TensorFlow, you don't need to know the linear algebra. You need to know how many layers. Like what if I have this level of dropout, etc. Right? That's especially for like a Fortune 500 data scientist who's working at scale, it's not research oriented. That's typically the level of detail you need to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that point you made about knowing which model to use is actually really important. I think I play more of that role than I do anything else, is that as a data scientist in a Fortune 500 company, it's knowing how to apply which model and knowing how to address each business problem with what model. That is kind of the basis of my role, I would say.
Yep.
I think there's a follow-up question about what helps you know which model. To Micah's question of what helps you know which models are applicable, that comes with practice and reading and research. And that's kind of the nature of this job, I will say, as a data scientist. Something that not surprised me, but it comes with the job is doing your reading outside of your work. And like I said, the same thing that I said about classrooms applies to your job, is that you're not going to learn about new models doing the same day-to-day work. You know, you have to read articles, you have to constantly be doing your research, and talking to other data scientists helps too. And that part is the self-educating part, and that it never stops, is that you familiarize yourself with new models, old models, whatever it may be, in your free time. And that's what I spend the bulk of my time doing, honestly. So it comes with the job.
And Micah, that's a really interesting question, right? Because when I tackle that problem, because Daphne and I were working at scale, right? Usually all of our solutions are now going to be used by hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of users. So that's always a factor. So when we're picking models, it's not only about kind of the statistical concepts that underlie the model. It's also, do we need this to work at real time? How many times is this model going to be called, right? So if you have an API that is calling your model, if you're running on a really complex neural network and it needs to be called 5 times every second, it won't work, right? So naturally, that's a model you can't use at all, right? So I noticed that you want to be a research scientist, and I think you'll probably get into like the nitty gritty of exploring a wide variety of models, building your own models. But in our world, I think we might sacrifice some of the performance a little bit and use something like XGBoost, which is highly performant, right? And that plays a huge factor into what models we decide. Aside from all like the statistical concepts, it's also just like, how can we even scale this?
Yeah. Absolutely. Definitely knowing what your resource limits are. And also that also goes back to like knowing how to pitch your projects, because sometimes that might require additional investment in something. And if it's, not something that your executive understands, they're not going to pay more for you to do something on like GCP. They're just not. They're not going to pay more for, whatever it is you need. So that's something that I dealt with a lot in the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, Micah, don't apologize. This is a really great discussion and important, right? When you're like working at scale, you have to stop thinking about the data science side of it and think about the engineering side, which doesn't really get talked about when you're kind of studying. Let's hop into the next question, because we have 34 questions outstanding still. We'll move a little quicker. What did the interview process look like for you?
Yeah, it is a little bit unique just because I came through Grace Hopper, but I did an initial call with a headhunter, I believe, someone who was not from Disney. And she basically was just kind of scoping out who I was. She didn't even have an idea of what my like potential role could be at Disney. She didn't even have a role for me yet. It was more so just like, this person submitted her resume. Let me just see if she's a decent person and if we want to interview her at all. From there, I was passed on to a role that kind of aligned with what I was looking for. And this is specific to the Grace Hopper process. So I interviewed, I want to say 3 times with the same person who was going to be my potential mentor, potential boss. And then did like a culture fit interview. And then I think at the very end, when they could not decide, I'm assuming it was because they could not decide between me and another person, they gave me that final case interview. So it was a fairly long and didactic process, but I will say that that was specific to Grace Hopper and specific to my org, where I don't think they even knew what they were looking for. So it was a combination of behavioral and case, and it was very specific to that process. So I almost don't like to share that, because I don't think you will really experience that unless you also go to Grace Hopper.
Yeah, I think it's tricky. Every position is gonna be so different. I feel like every role has been completely different. Use Glassdoor. Use Glassdoor to your advantage to figure out what the interview process is, just because it's impossible to know. It's so different every time.
Yeah, that, and also every company is going to differ. Some companies do have a very specific structured process to interviewing, in my experience, and you'll know if you look it up on Glassdoor.
Awesome. So Jinsu asks, what are your goals in the next 5 years of your professional career?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I'm only a year in, so even 5 years seems like a lifetime. Yeah.
All right, making me feel old. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I ideally would like to move in a more business-facing / consumer-based data role. So maybe not even necessarily as a data scientist. Some of my interests lie in more like CPG and how I can support businesses like that, or like even marketing science. Those are kind of concepts in data science that I would like to pursue more. So in my next 5 years, ideally, I would like to move into maybe a data science role first at a company like that I had just described, and then eventually moving into leadership. I see myself going into leadership as opposed to becoming or staying an engineer, so to speak, or a developer. That's also something that many people kind of have to come to terms with or decide in their career journey, is that whether or not you want to stay an engineer, be an engineer, or if you want to become or go into leadership. Some people don't actually want that. Some people don't want to be managers, don't want to be directors. That's cool. Maybe you want to be the best data scientist out there. That's cool too. I know that I don't want to be, so the next 5 years, hopefully move up in leadership for a data team.
Yep, that's solid. And it's tough to know that early on. I feel like.
Oh yeah, you don't have to think about that now.
Yeah, a year into my year post undergrad, I was still in aerospace and I didn't know how to code in Python. So things change very quickly.
It's changed.
Hovinus asks, what is your preferred framework or coding language that you typically use? Python, notebooks, VS Code? Are you using PostgreSQL, BigQuery, Presto? What are you typically using?
Yeah, I'm typically using Python. I am a fan of notebooks, but most of the people I think around me, non-data scientists obviously, operate in VS Code. I don't use PostgreSQL very much. Yeah, mostly in Python and notebooks. And then because of the specific area that I work in, I actually use Splunk a lot, which surprises people. But that is very much an infrastructure specific tool. And it's cool that I started out in this space because I got to learn this entirely new environment to me. But they now have these abilities where you can link Jupyter notebooks, you can link your models and everything, and deploy them within Splunk to then train on data that is ingested into Splunk. So that's something that's very specific to my role in my department. You'll probably never have to do that, but yeah, it was cool. It was a cool opportunity to learn something new.
Cool. And very similar to me, Presto SQL and Jupyter notebooks. This is a good question that people don't really ask very often. Micah asked, what sort of use cases does JIRA have?
What do you mean by use cases?
Well, I guess how do you use JIRA?
Yeah.
Why do you use JIRA? Yeah, just give a quick overview.
Yeah, well, no, mostly just for like management. I was introduced to it just because I got thrown into a huge data analytics platform like building initiative. And the team that I was working with, the program manager I was working with, just happened to be using it. So um, understanding agile scrum methodologies and working with program managers, typically that I feel like that's not as common in maybe data science, especially if you're the only data scientist, more common in like software development. But because my team just decided to do that, I felt like it was a really efficient way to operate as a team. And I enjoyed learning that new tool as well.
Yeah, this is a great question. I think everyone kind of chime in because most you should look at this thing called agile, right? It's a way like every 2 weeks you guys assess how you guys are progressing, and what JIRA allows you to do is break up a huge project into like bite-sized components. Like you could break up your feature engineering, your ad hoc analysis, etc. Um, and Daphne brought up a really great point that like if you're a sole data scientist, it might not be that useful to you because you need to know what you need to get done, but it is useful when you need to showcase your availability and your bandwidth to people who aren't working with you on a day-to-day basis. I think Daphne will attest to this. Like everyone will be asking for something. Like, can you pull this number? Can you pull that number? Can you build this? Jira is a great use case for you to just be like, look at my bandwidth. No, I can't. If you want something done, add a ticket and it'll get prioritized at some point. It's a really great way for you to like navigate those discussions of saying, no, I can't do this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's great because yeah, under your name, they create these things called JIRA tickets, and you have a ton of tickets sitting under your name, which means you're very busy. And you kind of cross things off over time. Typically, some kind of a program manager, project manager is going to be guiding the discussion every 2 weeks or so, and you kind of sit down and say, okay, we got this done, we got that done. This is not done. We need to start working on it. So I like that way of operating, but I recognize that it's not super common in data science.
Yep. Let's see. Okay. Do the data science jobs require an extensive knowledge of data structures and algorithms like a software developer, in your experience?
In terms of like data structures, I think that's highly dependent on the job. For me, yes, more so just because I am the only data person. So I've had to think about things like architecture and databases and ingestion. So I feel like typically that would be more a data engineering role. I don't know if, correct me if I'm wrong, but and then in terms of algorithms, I don't know what algorithms you're referring to specifically, but yes, for data science at least, that should be your expertise.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. For me, I don't think I'm building pipelines because we do have a big data engineering team, but it's good to know about it just because anything you build is going to need to go into production. So if you could think like an engineer, it makes it that much easier to get things into production. If you can't do that, then it's going to be a ton of rework and etc. So even if you're not building the like data pipelines and using the data structures, knowing about it is super useful.
Yeah, and from my understanding, based on what I've heard of other entry-level data science roles, it's typically not required of you. And if you're working at a company where you are on a team with a lot of data analysts and scientists, a lot of the time those pipelines will already exist or they'll be there. I just happen to be in a place where that does not exist, and I've had to play kind of a role in developing that.
Trial by fire. It's
terrible.
you know.
Great, but it's terrible at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Hayden asks, congrats on taking your leap of faith and scoring the job at Disney. You talked a lot about how at the time you did not feel qualified or prepared for the job, but clearly Disney felt otherwise. What do you think they saw in you, or what do you think they liked about you that convinced them you were a good fit for the job?
Yeah,
Great
that's
question.
a good question. Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that because I think this underscores one thing that I will add to the interview process, is that you should always ask for feedback at the end of your interviews. That has, helped me a lot because I take all that feedback and I've gone to my future interviews feeling a lot more confident, knowing that this was something that I needed to fix or something that set me apart. So something that my interviewer and who was supposed to be my future boss told me was that I stood out because I had an entrepreneurial quality, essentially, that I was not afraid to pursue new ideas and that I was not afraid of challenge and that I was someone who thought with my business acumen. I knew how to distill business problems down into technical solutions, essentially. How do I translate a business problem into a basic technical solution that I can then go and build? Because oftentimes, there are data scientists who don't understand that side of things, and then the executive doesn't do a very good job of explaining what it is they want. So to be able to kind of sit at the crossroads of that and sit in between that really set me apart and gave me an advantage. Although at the time I didn't know that. I thought, okay, well, I don't have the degree, so I'm always going to be at a disadvantage. But again, realize that you can play to your strengths and that might be the thing that sets you apart.
That's a great answer. Let's see. Angel or Angel asks, do you still pursue personal projects unrelated to work? Can you share some?
Yeah, I do. I spend a lot of my time doing that, especially during COVID. I think beginning of COVID, I kind of spent more time on work and then on speaking things. And then I realized that I wasn't pursuing the stuff that did make me curious and kind of fueled that fire in my data science journey. One thing that I did, not recently, but kind of earlier on in my data science career that was completely unrelated to my work was I love Mario Kart. I took Mario Kart data from Kaggle and I tried to like predict the best combination of like vehicles, gliders, and characters, essentially, which is super nerdy, but I liked Mario Kart at the time and I thought it was cool and it was interesting. So that's an example of a personal project that I was passionate about, but had nothing to do with work.
I think at no point should you stop doing projects that are unrelated to work. I feel like you'll lose that kind of edge. You lose the passion also because data science is a cool and fun industry. Don't make it mundane. You're doing yourself a disservice. If you can work as many projects as possible. I think recently I worked on like the Spotify recommender, which was loads of fun, right? Keep data science fun, like make a hat, but such a nerd. Okay. Next one from Micah again. I'm very curious about how you would handle something like burnout. I say this because I have a lot of ideas and have issues with follow through of said project.
Yeah, I had that same problem and still have that same problem. I think the problem is that I want to do so much at once that it is almost overwhelming. I don't know. Or that like you start on so many different things and then none of them you don't actually see them through. And that happened to me a lot, even now. But something that I do is I actually build like a curriculum or a timeline for myself. So I kind of set out different like subjects that I'm really interested in and which take priority. So for instance, right now, something I'm really interested in is learning more about like customer churn and lifetime value and stuff like that, because I want to go into something like CPG. And that, because I recognize that as being something I really want to go into, I prioritize that. And then I go, okay, what else is it that I want to learn and where would I go next? So I kind of set out this timeline of these are the buckets of subjects that I'm interested in, which take priority and which do I pursue first. And then kind of have that discipline and like hyper focus to go into that specific bucket and say, this is what I want to get done. These are the skills I want to learn. I'm going to tackle that first before I move on to that next thing. I feel like a lot of it came down to discipline for me and having structure around my projects, because if you kind of go about it aimlessly, it's difficult to see anything through, at least for me. I feel like I have a lot of trouble focusing on something, sometimes, especially outside of work, because it lacks that structure. It's coming out of, your personal desire to pursue something. So putting structure around your learning actually helps a lot, I've realized.
Amazing advice. And one thing I'd also like to do is just add a block for myself, like watching Netflix shows or like stupid things, right? Like you need to add that or else you will burn out for sure. I feel like a lot of people learn that throughout this COVID time period.
Funny. Yeah, no, if you were to look at my Google Calendar, like my non-work calendar, it's just blocks of time for like reading, learning, and like calls, catching up with friends. And that's helped me a lot, because sometimes you don't know what to do with your time. You know what you need to do, but you don't know how to like manage that time,
Yep.
Especially during COVID, like you said. So
totally.
yeah.
Another question, what did you do at LA Tech for Good? Are they working on any amazing projects right now?
Yeah, things are pretty slow right now, just with the holidays and everything. But some of the cool projects I worked on in the beginning was helping them build out their Salesforce platform and analyzing some of the data around our demographics, building out Tableau dashboards to figure out who it was that was supporting the organization, because I came in at a time where the organization was just starting up again. So we were kind of starting from nothing. I've had the opportunity to work on campaigns like providing internet for families around LA, because a bunch of people got sent home from school and stuff. And we don't realize that there are many families in LA who don't actually have internet, for instance. So how do we provide and work with technical partners to provide computers and internet service? And then I've had the opportunity to do talks and presentations through LA Tech for Good. So kind of pursuing my interest in data for good by doing a talk on actually algorithmic bias, for instance, and how we can incorporate ideas like intersectionality into our data analysis. So those are just some examples of things I've gotten to do. So everything from helping the organization in terms of infrastructure and building out the organization, but also having the opportunity to work on campaigns and then do like content and speaking for them based on my interest in data for good.
Cool, very cool. Didn't know about that internet project. It's pretty cool. Shen asked, how did you learn all the skills to show your competency as a beginner data scientist? Any communities, apps, data camps, etc.?
Yeah, that was something that I had thought a lot about when I first started. I was like, should I just do a boot camp? Should I just spend the entire summer going to a boot camp rather than trying to force myself to learn something? Because that's not for everyone. But yeah, I managed to get through by reading a ton of books. I still have a ton of data science books just sitting on my desk. I read textbooks. I went and I went on Kaggle, pulled out my own data sets, and I started working on projects that interested me, built out a portfolio, but I also took Coursera classes. I think that helped me a lot too. You don't have to pay for it to do the free trial. Life hack, but I took a ton of Coursera classes, honestly, and that helped me a lot because it provided structure around my learning. And then from there, sometimes I would take the things that I learned and applied it to, again, things that I was more interested in. So yeah, that was kind of an idea of how I got through my self-learning phase. But I also think it is important, going back to that point about putting structure around your learning. I put together a curriculum for myself around what it is I needed to learn. So I went through everything from like, I would go on like bootcamp sites and look at their curriculum. I would go on YouTube and look at other people's curriculum. And then I would even look at Coursera classes sometimes and look at the subjects they're teaching and in what sequence. And then I'd make a list or some kind of a structure, and I would go after those same subjects or ideas and learn them myself.
That is super great advice. And I think Coursera is just like, you can't say enough good things about it. Absolutely love those programs. They're so much fun. Daniela asked, hi, Daphne. Thank you so much for sharing your story. For someone like me who's transitioning into the world of data analytics, what do you think is the difference between the two? I think DA and DS are used interchangeably throughout organizations. Are there specific avenues to target with the two? Any advice you can share in terms of understanding where I fit in this world of analytics?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and something that I really only just started learning because I was interested in going into this more business-facing side of things. I actually started looking into data analyst roles. But the difference really is that data scientists are essentially trying to take data, recognize patterns, and either predict or find something new out of that data. And that will oftentimes include programming and building models and using statistical analysis and things like that. Data analyst roles are more so taking data and trying to derive almost like business insights and business value based on that data. So an example of that would be a lot of the data analyst roles that I'm looking at now for things like, CPG companies or more like direct to consumer companies are looking for people who are really good at SQL. That's like really not all you need to know. They prefer people who have some competency in Python and stuff, but they're very SQL heavy. roles, because you're typically going to be pulling from databases and data pipelines that already exist. It's data that's just sitting in their databases, and you're kind of going in and just looking for business insights. So that's typically what a data analyst would be doing. You'd be translating kind of insights into business value. Data scientists more so trying to create something new, automate something, build models. That's where I see the biggest difference. Not sure if that fully explains it. I'm sure there's more to it. Also, I think a lot of the same things you'd be doing as a data analyst are kind of expected of you as a data scientist in many instances. So doing that data analysis piece is going to be a big part of your job as a data scientist regardless. I think data analyst focuses a little bit more on that business value side of things.
Totally. One thing I always like to say is, like, if both are analytical roles, data scientist is like a proactive analytics, like thinking forward, predicting whatnot, whereas data analyst is reactive and retrospective analysis, where it's just looking at historical data and see if you can find anything. If you like predicting and trying to forecast what's going to happen, data science is going to be for you. And definitely data science is probably the more technical of the two, depending on what your cup of tea is, Daniela. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Claude asks, any tips on creating a slide deck executive report to present data analysis findings to executives?
Yes, I talk about this a lot in my speaking engagements, but this is literally the crux of my presentation usually. Not that I've got it down to a T, but I do have a process. And I think a lot of it comes from that business side of things and knowing how an executive thinks and what they expect. So I try and narrow it down to 5 slides. I typically say I have a pretty generic 5-slide structure that I will give people. And I don't know if I remember them right off the top of my head, but I'll typically start with stating the business problem, reiterating the business problem, talking about why it matters, talking through your data analysis and initial insights, going into your model that you actually built as a data scientist. And then the 4th piece would be talking about your results. The 5th piece is talking about applications. So I try and break it down that way, and I go about that storyline almost every single time. The one piece of advice I will give is that the content you put in those 5 categories is going to differ based on who your audience is. So you can be talking to an executive who is in data science, and maybe they have a really good understanding of what your model is. Let's say, for instance, you're talking to an executive who doesn't understand anything about data. He doesn't even know what a linear regression is, in which case your content will also change. So a piece of advice there is really only explain your work to the extent of your audience's knowledge. That I feel like has been a key takeaway from all of my presentations, because a piece of feedback I got at the end of my end of year review at Disney this year was that my presentation skills have improved significantly. I started leading meetings from day 1 on my job, and I sucked at it. And I was making these super crazy presentations, talking through these I was talking about like RNNs and TensorFlow in my first presentation, and no one knew what that was. So I lost everyone, essentially. Like, yeah, no one was paying attention to me. No one cared about me at that point. I was just rambling by myself in front of 15. It was terrible, but I've learned my lesson. And now I know, you don't talk about things that people don't understand. You talk about things at the level that they will understand.
I just put together, like, it's work in progress, next couple of weeks, a video on this. We should compare notes and approach. I'm really curious. So I'm with you, because I also have like a template that I use for every single
same
data meeting, because I'm like, I do this, it's just so often that no thought.
It's repetitive. Yeah,
exactly. That's so funny. Let's see. I'm just gonna clean some of these up. There's some about interview. I think we already talked about that. Let's see. Okay, Cho asks, when applying for data science roles, how important is it to have a portfolio of projects for the HR manager to actually look over on GitHub or Medium?
I don't think it's make or break, but I think it makes a very big difference, because it, like I said, it shows your initiative, but it also shows your ability. Because right off the bat, an interviewer, an HR manager only sees so much on your resume. Your resume can only say so much about you. And you can talk about your projects on your resume, but data science is one of those things where you actually have to do the work and show the work for them to understand your level of expertise. So I think it's very important, and that's maybe the first thing you should go after as someone who is just starting out in data science.
Yeah, definitely. And also, like, if you think about the recruiters that reach out, they're probably not very technical. So when you write about something in a Medium article that's like easy to understand, you relate to people that aren't technical, which are the people who are going to reach out to you to begin with. So I think the projects are obviously important, but going that extra step and like putting together a nice like wrapping it in a presentable way is like the best way to go, in my opinion. I feel like the engagement I got from recruiters before and after I started writing Medium articles was like night and day different. I feel like they really prefer to see that on your resume or on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, I love reading a good Medium article on someone's project. I don't know why, that gives me so much joy.
Totally. Yeah. We talked about this one. Let's see. Okay. This is an interesting one, right? I think if you're not working in the workforce, right, how do you develop your storytelling skills, right?
Yeah.
How do you get ready when you get into that first job or before you get into that first job?
Yeah, I think something that helped me was actually okay, this is kind of odd, but I watched a lot of speakers, a lot of leadership speakers, and that helped me a lot. I will say that I am someone by nature who enjoys storytelling, so I think, you know, it comes with some level of just a personal interest in that. But something that I do even to this day is I break down good stories. I break down other people's presentations, other executive leadership presentations. One of the examples I give a lot in my storytelling presentations and talks is just that you can look at a Disney movie, for instance, and that always inspires me in my presentations because there's a beginning, middle, and end to every good story. And you should just look at your presentations that same way. So one thing that you can do is, based on your personal projects, how can I build a story out of this? That's something that I still do and still work on to this day. How do I build a story out of this really great thing that I just did? Maybe create a mock presentation even. When I'm working on my personal projects, I tend to think in that way of, okay, let's say, for instance, I were doing this in a production environment, I were doing this in the workforce. How would I present it to an executive? So put yourself in that mindset and maybe like develop your deck, present it to a few people even, and get that practice in. That to me has been like the greatest way to practice something, is to just do it. And even if no one is going to see it, even if no executive or leadership is ever going to have any exposure to it, it's worth the practice.
Totally. And like, even like when you write about it and you write an article, you'll immediately realize, wow, like if someone were to try to read this, is way too technical, like no one's gonna be able to digest this. So even writing about it helps you kind of figure out what level of detail a presentation should be without being too dense. So like that helped me out quite a bit, because I was in the same boat as you. When I first started, I was getting way too technical in my presentations, and like you said, you lose people. Wow, I didn't realize it was 6:55 already.
Yeah.
So Teresa asks, we're definitely not going to get through all of these. There's still 20 questions left, but in the chat, let me know like if you guys want to have Daphne back to just do the Q&A portion and kind of you guys ask more questions. I feel like I'm volunteering her for this already, but I'm assuming she'll say yes.
Yes, I will.
How rude of me. Okay, that's one yes. Come on, guys, show some more support. There you go. There you go. Teresa asks, are there any data science adjacent jobs that I could work during school to gain more experience?
Yeah, something that I didn't do this personally, but I had some friends who did things like data analyst jobs at school even. So within the offices at school, if you have the opportunity to do that, Or if you have a professor who works in research and they need a data analyst or something, I had a lot of friends who did that too, and that was great exposure. Also, I think data science adjacent, maybe something along the lines of even like media analytics. I remember my first bit of analytics exposure in like a real world environment was in like media analytics and web analytics, even social analytics. I think that right off the bat shows some level of analytical capability. All of those things will help.
Definitely. Let's go. We go through a couple more questions. Oh, this is a great question from Brian. I hope you're still there. This is one of the last questions that was asked, but where do your business problems come from, or the work that you need to do? Does it come from other teams asking your team, stuff your manager dreams up, or does your team get to do exploratory work to find the problems to solve? That's a fantastic question, Brian.
Good question. All of the above, which is also the hard part, right? Another part of being a data scientist, being the only data scientist, is that you have to know how to prioritize these things. I get a lot of asks from other teams. During COVID, I actually got pulled into a really big stretch project for me on a completely different team. And then my actual boss got mad and was like, we offered you 50% of the time to this team. Why are you still working on their stuff? So yes, I do get a lot of requests from teams beyond my own team. My manager came up with a problem for me to solve right off the bat that I was hired specifically for, and that usually takes precedent. That will be priority because that has to do specifically with my team. Everything else that people come in with requests for, that usually takes second place and is not priority. And then I personally do a lot of exploratory work, just knowing that I am the only data scientist. It's not only a challenge for me, but I do want to work in the best interest of my team. And to do that, I want to make sure that I'm continuously exploring and looking for problems where I can apply myself. So it's a little bit of everything. Obviously, not everything takes first priority. I'd say the first priority is typically whatever priority my manager has set. If they have specific business objectives that they need to meet, that is what I'm working on. Second would typically be requests coming from other teams that are maybe really important. And then third is, okay, I have a little bit of extra time. What can I pursue next?
Definitely. I feel like this is like based off like one-on-one conversations about like prioritizing all that work for sure. I feel like, so Brian, if you're like going into a role like Daphne's, which is going to be really common, I think people underestimate how many times people jump into a role that doesn't really have a fleshed out data program. I think it's just more common than people realize. The best thing you do is like build a pool of ideas that everyone's thinking of, or like people think they want, things people want to work on, and use your technical acumen to prioritize based off of how long it would take versus how much business value it would give you, and then share that with everyone together. I think it'll make you look kind of very organized and diligent about how things should go moving forward, and it'll also save you the hassle of trying to like manage everyone's kind of expectations.
Yeah, that was definitely something I dealt with. And what I actually did this past month was I sat down with one of the key players on my team and I said, we need to gather use cases, prioritize them. If it doesn't seem feasible, let's stop thinking about it for now.
Totally.
Let's just move on. Think about the low hanging fruit first. And that's where our attention should be.
Okay, let me see if I find one quick question. Oh, this is good, right? Is learning deployment part necessary for a beginner level role?
Ooh, I would say typically no. At least from what I've heard. Sadly, I was thrown into a non-beginner role. But no, I would say in your first year, you will typically honestly be working more on the data analysis side of things and then building out models and potentially either passing them on to other people, or they're models that are just used to derive insights in some way or produce some kind of ad hoc prediction. At least in my experience, that's what it's been. But if you're at a higher level, obviously you have to work on deployment.
Yeah, I think just even if you're a beginner, understanding why certain types of models are good for deployment and certain models aren't, I think will just help you kind of add to the conversation, right? Like if you're a beginner and people are spitballing ideas and you say something like, oh, like, I don't think we should go with that because it won't scale when we send it to millions of users. I mean, that just looks like it looks really good in your part, right? And so subtle and also very simple thing to understand and think about. So keeping that in mind is super useful. I don't expect you to understand like how to build ETL pipelines and like Kafka streaming, like that's just too much.
Yeah.
But understanding what scales and what doesn't is simple and really useful as a beginner.
Yeah.
With that, I've saved all these questions. We could use it for another section. I think maybe early 2021, we'll have Daphne back and we'll talk more about kind of your questions and other topics. Maybe next time we'll just come in with a topic that we'll just discuss and hop into a Q&A. I don't know, I'll think about it and we'll definitely have her back. I think very popular. But let me, before I leave, here are all of kind of the contents. Our LinkedIn, definitely like follow and connect with Daphne. She puts out a ton of great content. She goes to a bunch of the other events that you can attend to. So definitely connect with her. I mentioned check out my YouTube channel. I think a lot of technical, non-technical resources that I think will help you guys kind of get up to speed. And also the LinkedIn group. Take a look. I think it's tough trying to break into data science. So build, becoming a part of a community is usually very helpful. So check that out, and I hopefully it's helpful for you guys. With that, I think we'll sign off. Thanks a lot, Daphne. I think this was a lot of fun, and
This is very successful.
you were a hit.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun.
All right, see you guys. Have a good night.
Have a good night.